Welcome to the Engineering Emotions and Energy Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Wink. On today's show, we're going to be focusing on a lot of stuff yoga. So I've been doing a 300-hour yoga teacher training, and it's close to wrapping up. So I'm going to share a lot of what I've learned about yoga with you. So it's going to be kind of a fun stuff you probably wanted to ask, but were afraid to, or maybe even know enough to even ask some of these questions that I'm going to be going over. But first, I want to give an update on last week's topic where we were talking about installing habits, where I was in the process of installing a new way of eating. I am going no sugar, no grains to lose the Quarren 15. And last week, I had just finished up removing sugar from my diet. This past week, grains have been gone. I've still been kind of allowing myself some Cheeto. No, not the poofy, fake cheesy orange nuclear leave-ins in your fingernail type Cheetos, but keto Cheeto type processed stuff. I've been allowing a little bit of that. I got some Quest bars that kind of they satisfy my yummy craving, if you will. I'm a bit of a chocoholic. I love my chocolate, enjoy it very much. So found, these chocolate chip cookie dough Quest bars. They have, I think it's under 10 calories, which if you look at most protein type bars is huge. And I actually know what most of the ingredients are, and it semi-satisfies my chocolate sweet tooth. So point is, week to week, getting better. And so this next week, going to be more onto just pure foods, more and more is the goal. So yoga, what exactly is yoga? So in Sanskrit, it can be defined as a union or discipline, or it could also be thought of as a unitive discipline. York Forrestein, who's our manual on yoga philosophy, he writes that. Fantastic. If you just kind of want to know like the history of yoga, which is very vast and very long, does a phenomenal job. So I'd say I would recommend something from him. He does a lot of his own translations as well. So he's actually able to read the root documents, right? And he's not just going like, well, I read somebody's translation. He can go to the source, because sometimes the translation has huge meanings. I believe Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, there's a book you can get that has like 10 different translations from Sanskrit, so you can compare. And man, is it amazing how big of a difference a translation can make. But Jorg translates a line out of the Maitreya Upanishad, defining yoga as, yoga is said to be the unity of breath, mind, and senses, as well as the renunciation of all states of finite existence. To me, I like to call yoga, it's the practice of unifying mind, body, and spirit. And this takes different forms for different people, because we all kind of have various levels of attunement to our mind, to our body, to our spirit. And we also have various levels of synchronicity between them. Some of us might be completely detached from how our body is at all. That's where I was like 20 years ago before I'd ever gotten into yoga. It was like, tell me, hey, you need to move your hips and adjust your lumbar spine, and I have no idea. I know those are words, but I can't do it. So that's why there's all different types of yoga, so that it can meet you where you're at, and you can get on your path to this disciplined unification of your mind, body, and spirit. So that's what yoga is to me. Now, if we go to, as I was talking about, the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali, Patanjali looks at it as there's Prakriti, which is the material world. That's the world that most of us are used to living in, the physical things, the table, the physical body. And then there is Purusa, which is spirit or pure awareness or consciousness. And then you go back to Prakriti, which is basically everything else. Suffering comes from our attachment to Prakriti. And through the yogic practices, we can transcend Prakriti and be subsumed by Purusa, which is that pure awareness, that consciousness. the practices from the Yoga Sutras are mostly meditative. There were very few physical postures or asanas. They were basically just meditative seats. So back then, there was no need for all these, vinyasas and yin type poses. It was just sit down, sweet and steady, transcend the material world, and come into, pure ecstatic bliss, rest into pure awareness, consciousness. Another important aspect is that, according to Patanjali, it was a dualistic philosophy, meaning that the physical world, prakriti, and consciousness, purusa, those are completely separate. Like, it was almost the prakriti is in the way of purusa. So you basically have to completely let go of it to get to purusa. You got to let go of the material world. So, this body, these physical things, money was almost a barrier to full enlightenment, that resting in pure awareness. This is very different compared to Hatha Yoga, which is a newer version, more or less, a few hundred years of yogic history pass, and we start to get Tantra Yoga, which is a non-dualistic form of yoga where one of the sayings they like to use is all this is that, which means that there isn't that separation between prakriti and purusa, the material world and the conscious world. There is no separation. They are like a spectrum. And one of these things I really love about sort of the tantric view of the world is that our perception of the world becomes a creative act, where the world we observe, it's a reflection of what we're creating. We are effectively co-creators with the divine. So it's not that the world is there and then we have to deal with it. It's the world is there because we help to make it that way. And then Hatha Yoga, which is a derivative in some ways of Tantra Yoga, which is not to be confused with, it's referred to either as I think it's like left-handed Tantric Yoga, or sort of the California New Agey Tantra, which is all like the very sexual focused. That's not what traditional Tantra Yoga is really all about. It's more this non-dualistic, where everything is interconnected. The physical body, the world we live in, is not a barrier to consciousness. There, again, all this is that. And Hatha goes a kind of a step further and provides very specific practices to help awaken us out of the pure focus of, our material attachment, and allows us to awaken into consciousness. So that's where the physical asana yoga practices come from, because if the mind is too skitter-scatter to even sit and meditate, we need to do something with the body to get it in a state where we can become aware of our consciousness. So then there's this idea of what is the experience of embodiment in a yoga practice. So to me, embodiment in a yoga practice is when the doing goes away and one just drops into being the yoga practice. I used to love skiing. When I drive, I usually like to drive on that edge of, what's reasonably safe, won't get me a ticket. And this is because when you are sort of at the peak of your physical doing, you are completely in the moment. The thinking drops away. You are what you are doing. You are not thinking about, hey, I'm not thinking about driving the car. I am driving the car. So it's basically the mind, the body, the spirit. Remember, we were talking about it's the unitive discipline is what yoga is. So it's getting those aligned, and then past and future, they drop away into sort of a forever presence. And there is an experience of aliveness, newness that goes beyond, you could be, driving your car on the same road, or you could be doing the same yoga practice that you've done over and over again, like Bikram yoga, Ashtanga yoga, all of these. There's nothing new other than you in that instance are completely new and experiencing, that pose, that breath, the mind. It's infinitesimally unlikely that all of those things would come together in that exact same way. Your hair that day, your soreness, your stiffness, your strength, your restedness. Like, what are the chances of everything in this moment that you're hearing me right now, this moment, what are the chances of everything having to do with your causes and conditions? It's so incredibly unlikely, yet at the same time, this moment had to be the exact way it is right now. It is necessary, it is perfect, and everything is possible in this moment. So it's both boring and fascinating at the same time. There might be a following of a routine, yet the body, mind, spirit is truly leading to what is necessary in the moment and the next. And that's what it is to be really embodied during a yoga practice. And in a 90, 60, 30-minute session of yoga, this embodiment, this feeling, this state, this way of being, it's highly unlikely that it's going to be anywhere close to the amount of time that you're practicing. If you spot it for just a second, you'll know it. You'll be like, whoa, I am here. This is happening. There is nothing else. And then it'll be gone. You'll be like, I wonder what the next pose is. Did I do that last thing right? Like, I really messed up. But for that moment, you've utilized a physical practice to transcend the physical and get into that sort of conscious state, which is truly beautiful. So what is one of the poses where you could get in touch with that? So Virabhadrasana 1, Warrior 1. If you haven't done it before, you would step the front foot just basically coming from downward dog or a plank pose. You'd step your front foot to be just inside your hand at the top of the mat. You'd rotate your back foot about 45 to 60 degrees. You'd use the entire foot to support you, slight bend in the back knee. Front knee is either above or behind the front ankle, because you don't want the knee going over the ankle, because you want to make sure that there's good support in the knee joint. Then when your base is built, you can start with your hands on your hips, shoulders down, then reach your hands up, palms facing together. Shoot the shoulders towards the front. It's okay if your back hip is behind your front. It's not necessary that you have the hips squared. The shoulders should be squared, as long as the hip bones are level. And that's your Warrior 1. And this is one of these things that almost every yoga class, you might do this posture, yet you're going to be different every time, because how you got to that class is going to be different. What you have going on after is going to be different. So each time, take it fresh and notice the little things, like just noticing, how are your toes in the front foot versus the back foot? Is there a toe that's like not doing anything? Put it to work. Notice it. Be that pose. Now, another pose is coming into downward facing dog, or Adho Mukha Svanasana from a tabletop. That's where you would have your shoulders over your hands and you'd have your hips over your knees. So from tabletop, you'd want to first engage your navel up towards your spine, and then you can begin to rock forward and back, keeping that straight line from your head to your tail. And then begin to notice your hands and how they connect up through the shoulders, through the back, to your tail. And then notice your feet. From the feet, the connection up through the hips, back of the spine, to your head. So head to tail, hands to tail, feet to head. And then with a slight bend of the elbows, while pushing the triad, that's the thumb and the index and the middle finger, into the mat. Lift your knees slightly up off of the mat. Without moving the spine, allow the sacrum to go up and back, keeping the knees bent as much as is needed, both activating the hamstrings and the quads, keeping head to tail, hands to tail, feet to head, as you yield into slightly straightened legs. Bending your elbows and your knees, rolling over your toes, keeping the shoulders on the back with the anterior tilt of the pelvis. So that's the top front of your pelvis rotating forwards. Your sit bones go back and up towards where the wall meets the ceiling, elbows micro bending away from the center line. This is what's getting you into your downward facing dog that you can enjoy. I probably should have mentioned that if you're driving, don't do this, but I'm guessing you probably figured that out. But if you're just like sitting around listening, you could have really just tried that out. So another thing that a lot of people don't think about is their organs with relations to yogic postures. We often just think like, well, there's just bone and there's muscle, and that's all there is. At least as far as movement and yoga. But really our organs and glands and other parts of us, our nervous system, fascia, they play big roles because they're part of our body. And yoga, it's as a unit of discipline, involves the entire body. So we can start to think of our other systems. So if we think of, our organs, if we want to think, okay, well, if I'm doing something with my lower limbs, what organ would be involved in that? It would be the large intestines. Whereas when we're thinking of sort of our upper limbs, so like doing arms or something like that, so like in the Virabhadrasana 1, the Warrior 1, the arms moving up overhead, we can think of the lungs as being supportive with that. And so just kind of imagine moving with the breath and picturing the lungs helping as the arms move. And then if we're focusing on something to do with, the spine requiring some support, so it's even being in that tabletop, we can start to think of the kidneys or the bladder as sort of being a, organic support to our spine. Feeling overwhelmed by the daily grind? Imagine if you could pause, reset, and truly connect with a calmer, more fulfilled you. It's not just a dream, it's absolutely possible. Hi, I'm Justin, and I invite you to discover the life-changing techniques in my book, Engineered to Love. Right now, I'm offering a free chapter complete with guided audios that have already helped so many people find peace amidst the chaos. These aren't just any techniques. They're transformative practices designed to help you love yourself and engage deeply with the present moment, without even having to close your eyes to the world around you. So join us at engineeredtolove.com/sample and access your free guided session. It's time to bust the busyness and embrace the joy, ease, and love in your everyday life. Don't wait. Start your journey to a more relaxed and recharged you today, because you deserve to live a life you love. Visit engineeredtolove.com/sample. See you there. Another big part of yoga practice is to look at it through different lenses of movement systems. So we're often used to thinking of human movement when we're watching, our favorite sports ball team, basketball, and able to see like the amazing running while dribbling and jumping up and doing a slam dunk and the pass and, the 3-point shot and somebody jumping up and slamming that ball out of there and all these very complicated movements. But we can also do a lot of our movements thinking back to, more basic, because when we're, developing, from our embryonic state to our, complete baby form, human form, we go through a lot of patterns that we see different forms of life. So when we're at our smallest, there's cellular breath, which is where a cell is just taking nutrients in and it expels waste. And we can kind of visualize all of our cells in our body doing that during just a simple, seated or laying type of posture. Another fluid pattern is sponging, where things kind of come in at more of a system level and go out, sort of a sponging. So any contraction of a muscle, we can kind of think of this sponging a type of sensation. So like if you're engaging the quad, think of sort of a sponging action where all of that fascia, that muscle tissue is basically firming up and then releasing. There's also pulsation. The next is navel radiation, which is very much like a starfish. And if you think about, from our own navel, we have 2 legs, 2 arms, and our head. And then also there's kind of our tailbone as well. So we are also like a starfish in some ways, and we can picture that radiation coming out in various poses, like prasarita, which is a wide-legged stance, and if you kind of starfish. Then a little bit more advanced is the notochord, which is very primitive type of being where you do start to have the basics of a nervous system. And so just that simple connection head to tail. So like, in the tabletop before going into downward facing dog, just consider that, you are an integrated being with a nervous system going from head to tail to head. And then you have mouthing as a movement pattern. And so this would be sea life, that is basically kind of like a tube-like being that's just mouthing, trying to get food. And seated spinal twists are a great posture where you can kind of really embody your mouthing behavior, where you're trying to turn and your mouth is sort of the lead vehicle. We then move from fluid patterns to skeletal patterns of movement. So there's 3 types of skeletal patterns. There's homologous movements, which is very much like a frog. So where, your left and right hands or feet, they move together. Next is homolateral movement. This is like a lizard type movement where, the left and right front feet aren't aligned, but there is kind of a connection with the back feet. And then there's contralateral movement, and this becomes more like how a cat would move or human babies would move, where you can, start to move your, say your left, you could have your left elbow touch your right knee, and then extend the left elbow and straighten the right knee. So that's your contralateral type movements. Now in yoga, one of the most important things is basically in all the movements, there's a relationship to our spinal position. And so it's very important to understand how the spine moves in space. So there's the SI joint, the sacroiliac joint, which is at the base of the spine. So at the base of the cranium, you have your cervical spine, then you have your cervical spine, then the thoracic spine, then the lumbar spine, and then you have your SI joint. And so there's 2 possible ways the SI joint can move. There's nutation and counter nutation. So nutation is when the top of the sacrum rotates forward. So this often happens while doing a back bend or an extension type posture. And then when going into spinal flexion, so this would be like a forward fold, the sacrum counter nutates. So this is, if you're getting deeper into the study of yoga, you might hear this, nutation, counter nutation. So related to the SI joint is the other side of your pelvis. There's the pubic disc or pubic symphysis. And this is critical in allowing weight force transferred from one leg to another. And this is really what allows for the mobility in the pelvis. And it's what allows for differentiation between the pelvic halves. a lot of times we think that the pelvic bowl is like a static one thing and there's no, separation, but really that pubic disc is a cartilage-like thing that really there's two separate halves and they can move somewhat independently. And that's what you want in a healthy system is you get the stability from the SI joint, and the pubic symphysis is what gives the mobility. And so it's that stability and mobility, which leads to a very strong system, like a tree. You want stability, but you also want mobility. If it's too stiff, then there's too much force and it can break. But if it's too flexible, it's just going to flop over, and that's not good either. It's the right balance. And yoga is all about balance. So there's a system called Embody Yoga, which teaches a very safe, integrative way to both teach and practice yoga. And there's 7 movement principles. So there's Sthira Sukham Asanam, which is stating that every posture should be sweet and steady. So there should be no, holy shit, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Like that is not sweet, or is it steady? That is in a state of panic. And often we live our lives too much in a state of panic. We really want to go from the sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic nervous system. And so in every pose, we should be going for this sweet and steady kind of quality. So even though if you're new to yoga, you might see some of these poses and you're like, oh my gosh, that looks insanely difficult. If when you're actually doing the posture, it feels insanely difficult, that might not be the time for that pose for you. Not to say that there shouldn't be some challenge in aspiring to new stuff. We want to play with that edge, but we really want to play at the edge, not going beyond it. Second is a calm and mobile spine, because as we were talking about, the spine is really key in yoga. And so knowing where it is in space, and, are we in extension? Are we in flexion? Regardless of what the pose is, because the spine is kind of usually in one of those or the other. The third is all movement is relational, not positional. And so we want to be looking for yield, push, reach, and pull, because there really is not like an end to everything. Everything should be in response to something else. The fourth is the contained body principle, which is you don't want, so in yoga, there's this concept of prana or energy, in Chinese medicine, qi. So it's like a kind of energy. But one way to look at it physically is just that there should be sort of physical structural integrity. So if you were to imagine, flow of energy or flow of any fluid, and you were to look at somebody and it looks like there's like a kink in the hose, something's a little off, that means there's kind of a kink in the prana. The energy flow is not going to be so good. So you want to make sure that the body is containing all of the prana. So you want to check these, feet to head, hands to tail, head to tail type of connections, and ensure that there's smooth flowing angles. There shouldn't be any kinks in the hose. The fifth principle is that support precedes action. So you always want to make sure that the body has proper support before doing any type of action. Because again, that's going to lead to the sweet and steady, right? If something feels like, you got to jump, like something's probably wrong. Start over, support precedes action. Sixth is balance, stability, and mobility in the body. So basically that principle of how the pubic symphysis and the SI joint work together, we want to be looking for that in the entire body, this sort of tying mobility with stability. And the seventh is the principle of permeating consciousness, which is where we turn on our observational mind and turn off the critical analytical mind. So when I was talking at the beginning about this idea of embodiment in yoga, this is really it. Because when you are fully into that pose and that posture, there is no analysis. It is purely observational. It is being, noticing, and the happening is, almost beyond you, if you will. So we want to be encouraging this consciousness, being conscious, being present, being now, being the observer, and not analyzing. Because when we're analyzing either something that has happened or something we want to happen. But if we're just observing, we're observing now. So now I'm going to go over, this is something where if you're driving, please don't do it. Just listen and note and kind of just consider this is something you could practice later. But if you do have the opportunity that you could, be laying down, close your eyes. I'm going to describe how you would do navel flooding breath, which is a pranayama technique. So you would start by lying down. You'd come into constructive rest, which is you would laying down on your back. You can have your palms either down or up, rested, and then you bend your knees and allow your feet to go, if you had a yoga mat, about mat width apart, and you allow your knees to fall together towards your center line. So that's constructive rest. You'd close down your eyes, then start to place your hands on your belly so you can start to notice the physicalness of your breath. And you'd start with a soft ujjayi breath, which is sort of a constrictive breathing. So if you ever try to like fog up a mirror, or you kind of got that so it's kind of like that. It's similar to that, but you close your mouth and you do that through the nose. So it still is kind of audible. So begin with that soft, slow ujjayi breath. And then now you're going to imagine your abdomen is like a lake bed. And you want to imagine that lake is going to be filling from the bottom behind your navel to the sides as you inhale. So as you exhale, you imagine it draining. And then explore the visualization and the sensation with each inhale and exhale. So you keep the rib cage will open up and lift towards the ceiling while the belly maintains still. And between each round, you can do a resting breath, which is just natural breathing. And you want to do a few rounds of this navel flooding breath. So, with inhale, imagine that it's flooding, still keeping that abdomen tight. And then as you exhale, imagine that water draining out. And you want to do this for a few rounds. Inhaling, filling that lake. Then exhale, it drains out. Again, resting breath after each one. So very relaxing breath that you can connect with yourself. Another important concept in yoga is the diaphragms of the body, and these are associated with different bandhas. So there's 8 bandhas. This is when we include the hands and the feet. So there's the Uddiyana bandha, which is associated with the breathing diaphragm and the peritoneal sac. There's Mula bandha, which is associated with the pelvic diaphragm. Jalandhara bandha, it's the throat energy seal, and that's achieved by having a slight tilt of the head. Jiva bandha is associated with the tongue to the hard palate. Swati bandha is achieved by the pelvic halves kind of coming towards the midline. This is also activating this deep front line. There's then the Nabi bandha, which is associated with the mesentery and is activated when the navel goes towards the spine, like when we were doing the navel flooding breath. Then Pada bandha is related to the feet, and Hasta bandha is related to the hands. So I'm now going to go through some different breathing exercises. So again, if you're driving, you can attempt, but make sure you maintain consciousness. Please be careful. Do not close your eyes if you're doing something that requires your attention. Maybe save this for, come back, shoot down later and try this later. So Nadi Shodhana, where Nadi is one of the channels and Shodhana means cleaning or purifying. So you want to sit in a comfortable position, probably seated. You want to use you're going to be, if you do the actual Nadi Shodhana, you're going to be physically blocking off your nasal passages. You can also do the shadow version, which is where you just visualize the as if you were blocking off the nasal passages, but you don't actually have to do it. So if you're going to do the full version, your right thumb would come to your right nostril, but you don't stick it up your nose. You just there's a little ridge halfway, between your nose, where if you just kind of push your thumb there, it'll block off that airway from the outside. And then what you're going to use your ring finger of the right hand, the ring finger of your right hand will be used to shut off the left nostril. All right. So you're going to close your right nostril with your right thumb, and then inhale through your left nostril. Then you're going to close it with your ring finger, and then you're going to exhale slowly through the right nostril. So, and then inhale through the right nostril, close off the right nostril, open up left nostril, and exhale through your left nostril. Inhaling through the left nostril, closing off the left nostril, exhaling, opening up the right nostril, exhaling through the right nostril. Keep going, repeating the cycle, ideally 3 to 5 times. Then release the hand and go back to normal breathing. And that's Nadi Shodhana. And again, you don't have to physically block the nasal passages. You can do the shadow Nadi Shodhana and just picture the breath going in your right nostril, out your left nostril, then into your left nostril, and then the air exhaling out your right nostril and repeating. The next breath exercise is box breathing, which this is one of my favorites. It's also known as Samavrita pranayama. It's a very powerful relaxation tool that can help clear your mind, relax your body, and allow you to focus. And you can do it just about anywhere. So you just need to have a comfortable seat, support your back. Ideally, your feet are on the floor. Again, don't close your eyes if you're driving, but if you can safely close your eyes, please do. Breathe in through your nose, slowly counting to 4. Feel the air filling your lungs. Then maintain your breath for a count of 4. So you don't want to, this should be relaxing and soothing. So it shouldn't be a clamping of your airways. You just want to simply avoid inhaling or exhaling for a count of 4. Then slowly exhale for a count of 4. Then hold that exhale for another count of 4. And then simply repeat for about 4 minutes until you feel calm and centered. So again, it's inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. And repeat. It's very simple, very powerful. Highly, highly encourage it. The other is Ujjayi breath, which we kind of went over already. It's kind of like, having a soft hissing almost with your breath. Ujjayi is victorious breath, is kind of how it can be translated from the Sanskrit. So again, I like to think of, you can even put your hand up as if you're going to fog up a mirror, that ha, 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 ha. and then close your mouth, and then kind of make that same, but now out of your nose. And then with that same restriction, you would inhale and exhale. And this is a breath that you could do just as a seated meditation. You can also do it during an entire yoga practice. And in fact, it's very important that if you can't maintain Ujjayi breath, that probably is an indication to take a resting pose and allow yourself to come back to sweet and steady breathing. We often think that, if I'm out of breath, I'm getting more out of it. This may or may not be true. There are people that can run entire marathons and they could hold a conversation just like I am doing with you, because they have trained their body to be doing what to most would seem incredibly strenuous, but their body is so well trained, so well in sync, that they can maintain sweet and steady breath during that entire marathon, get pro winning times, but they're not, out of stress. And remember, this is a disciplined, unifying practice where we want to synchronize mind, body, and spirit. And if our breath gets too out of whack, that's effectively our body is starting to take over, and then our mind is going to kick in and want to do something. So very important to be able to maintain this Ujjayi breath. Now, I'd mentioned something called the deep front line. So these are a set of muscles. We often think of our muscles as being very separate. Like, okay, I've got my calf muscle, I've got my hamstring muscle, I've got my glute muscles, right? I got my pecs, and they're all separate. But there's other ways to look at these muscles, because they've actually done dissections where it all sort of depends on how you use the scalpel. If you use the scalpel in different ways, you can actually see that there are complete unobstructed connections going from our head down to our toe, where you could pull a muscle around the toe and you could get movement, all the way through the pelvis, up through the thorax, and up through the head, because we really are truly very interconnected people. And so the deep front line is what is meant to be engaged and keep us upright and erect, and is what we should be doing most of our activities with. Yet we mostly end up using our superficial back line because many of us spend so much time in a seated, unhealthy position. So the superficial back line is comprised of our plantar fascia, so that's our feet, up through the Achilles tendon, the gastrocnemius, which is the calf muscle, then up through the hamstrings, then the sacrotuberous ligament, the erector spinae, then, that's the up the back, then to the top of the head and the space between the brows. So a lot of these muscles are, not very large, and not great at handling a bunch of weight that's kind of trying to, collapse forward like a forward fold. It's trying to counteract, but these muscles weren't really designed for that, because really when we're standing or sitting, our structure is meant to be balanced, so that our bones can, take most of the weight. We're not using these smaller muscles to prevent a collapse. And when we're utilizing the deep front line, which starts from the inner arches of our feet up the adductors, the ellipsopsoas complex, our diaphragms involved, the anterior longitudinal ligament, the quadratus laborum, the transverse abdominis and thoracis, the scalene muscles, and longus colli and capitis muscles on up. When these are engaged, and one of the best ways to sort of like engage these is if you're standing and doing mountain pose, is to put a block between your legs and to have an inward rotation of your thighs to squeeze that block, like you're trying to like spit the block out your backside. You're trying to poop it out. That's getting the deep front line going. And if you can have those muscles firing when you're standing or doing a lot of things, you're going to come from a place of more strength, and you're not going to get the fatigue and then all of the associated challenges if you're in a posture and you're using mostly your superficial backline. And now the last topic that I want to go over in this yoga information that you were probably afraid to ask and didn't even want to know, but Justin's here to tell you anyway. We're going to talk about mantra and mudra and how they can be part of your yoga practice. So mantra, mudra, they're very powerful ways of extending your yoga practice further by involving more aspects than just the sort of the grosser physical body. It gets the physical body going in a more subtle, yet I would argue even more amazing ways. So mantra is an amazing way to both practice and to see a result of how your practice has impacted kind of your body, mind, spirit connection. So the connection, so mantra is usually it's Sanskrit, either a word or multiple words that are spoken in repetition. Om is probably one of the most famous seed syllables and used as a mantra. And often practice will start with an Om and end with an Om. And to me, that is like the biggest, always the coolest indicator of the impact of a yoga practice. Because that first Om, that is kind of like, oh, like it usually feels like a complete mess. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm embarrassed to be making noise in front of other humans. And then after class, with the whole group, that Om comes out and it nails it with everyone else. And it's like my body, my mind, and my spirit, they are all synchronized and even more so synchronized with everyone else in that room. You can also just do a mantra practice on its own where you have some mantra that you repeat and just sort of that noticing the feeling with the breath, the movement of the lungs, the diaphragm, the mouth, noticing all that and hearing the quality of the voice with that repetition is very powerful because you're working on voice, you're working on breath, and your physical body is all involved when you're practicing mantra. So mudra is basically positionings of your hands, putting your hands and your fingers in certain positions. Now there's entire books with lots and lots of different mudras, so I'm not going to go over those. One of the most common ones is the Gyan mudra, though. So this has to do usually with knowledge or wisdom. And so the way you would do the Gyan mudra, and you've probably seen it, is your index finger and the tip of your thumb come to touch, and then your remaining three fingers, the little finger, middle finger, ring finger, those are outstretched. And then usually it's the palm is up, and you'd kind of like rest these in your lap. So this is the Gyan mudra. And the really cool thing about mudra is it's physical, but it's also very subtle because the instructions on how, the fingers should be touching is they should be touching, not touching. So it's when meditating, when maybe even doing a static posture, if you want to take a mudra, it can be very enlightening to bring your attention to, any fingers touching or how the hand is placed and kind of notice like, what's the quality of the pressure? Because I know for myself, I will often check in and go like, wow, I've got like an iron vice grip between my fingers here. Like, oh my gosh, like how can I relax into the present moment and go back to touching, not touching? And it allows for just another pathway to center, be in the moment, relax, and have the mind, body, spirit sort of interplay begin in that synchronization to have a space to be embodied, to be now. So that's all I've got for you guys on this episode of the Engineering, Emotions, and Energy podcast. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. Hit me up on Facebook at Emotions Engineering. You can also, send me an email, justin@emotionsengineering.com. Love to hear what you think. If you got any questions, hit me up. All right, that's all I got for today. Namaste and good day.